Morning began long before daylight, signaled not by clocks, but by noise and force. Guards moved down the corridor shouting, striking doors with rifle butts or batons, sometimes dragging prisoners upright by their hair or arms if they were slow to respond. There was no allowance for age, injury, or illness. Prisoners slept on bare concrete floors or thin, rotting mats, packed tightly together to conserve space, often soaked in sweat, urine, or blood from untreated wounds. Lice and rats were common. Many prisoners woke already feverish, coughing, or delirious. But sickness never excused anyone from standing. Inspection followed immediately. Prisoners were ordered to strip completely, regardless of temperature, and line up while guards and medical personnel walked past them. Bodies were examined like livestock. Skin color was noted for signs of shock or infection. Swelling, pus-filled sores, frostbite damage, and open wounds were prodded without concern for pain. Doctors listened to breathing, checked pupils, and sometimes pressed fingers into infected flesh to see how the body reacted. A cough, trembling hands, jaundiced eyes, or blackened toes could mark someone for experimentation later that day. These inspections were silent and methodical. Prisoners were never told what was being recorded or why. Food came afterward, when it came at all. It was usually a watery porridge or a small portion of grain, sometimes mixed with sawdust or spoiled vegetables. The quantity was deliberately insufficient. Starvation weakened prisoners, but was carefully controlled. Bodies needed to remain alive long enough to endure experiments. Water was limited, often dirty and sometimes intentionally contaminated. There was no chance to wash or clean wounds. The smell inside the cells, rot, infection, waste, and decay, grew heavier each day. After feeding, prisoners waited. Waiting was one of the cruelest parts of the morning. They listened for footsteps in the corridor, knowing that at any moment a number could be called. When it was, guards entered immediately, binding the prisoners' hands and removing them without explanation. Screaming or pleading changed nothing. Those left behind watched in silence, knowing that survival that morning meant nothing more than a temporary delay. The afternoon was devoted almost entirely to experimentation. Prisoners were transported to laboratories, operating rooms, or outdoor testing areas. Many realized where they were only after seeing the equipment: leather restraints, surgical tables stained dark from previous use, metal instruments laid out in rows, pressure chambers, freezing tanks, or sealed rooms with gas delivery systems. Medical experiments were conducted without anesthesia, as a rule. Pain responses were considered essential data. Prisoners were injected with bacteria or viruses to deliberately induce diseases such as plague, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, or anthrax. Others were already infected and observed as symptoms progressed. Doctors recorded body temperature, heart rate, bleeding, vomiting, seizures, delirium, and the precise moment organs began to fail. Some prisoners were forced to walk or stand while ill to observe endurance under stress. Live dissections were not rare exceptions, they were routine. Prisoners were restrained and cut open while fully conscious so doctors could observe organs functioning in real time. Lungs were exposed to study breathing, stomachs open to observe digestion, and intestines manipulated to track infection spread. In some cases, parts of the brain were examined while prisoners reacted to pain or loss of motor control. Screams were ignored. Death, when it occurred, was simply recorded, sometimes with notes on how long it took to happen. Weapons testing took place alongside medical experiments. Prisoners were exposed to chemical agents to test lethality, dispersal, and time to death. Others were tied to posts or placed at measured distances from explosives to observe blast injuries. Frostbite experiments were especially common during winter. Limbs were submerged in ice water or exposed to freezing air until frozen solid, then thawed in different ways, slowly, violently, or repeatedly, to observe tissue decay, nerve damage, and gangrene. Some prisoners were drained of blood to study shock and organ collapse. Others had limbs amputated, bones fractured, or muscles severed to examine healing under controlled conditions. Survival was never considered success. Prisoners who lived through experiments were often returned to their cells, marked for future use. Those who survived the afternoon were brought back to confinement. Many could not walk, and were dragged along the floor or carried by guards. Cells filled with the sounds of labored breathing, quiet crying, and delirious murmuring. There was no treatment intended to heal. Any care given was part of another experiment, such as deliberately infecting wounds, reopening incisions, or withholding bandages to observe how injuries worsened. Evening inspections sometimes occurred. Guards checked which prisoners were still alive, occasionally beating those who failed to respond quickly enough. Interrogations took place sporadically, though answers were rarely important. The real objectives were intimidation, exhaustion, and submission. Prisoners were left with untreated wounds, exposed bone, severe burns, or festering infections. Some were denied water overnight to study dehydration. Others were left naked in cold cells to worsen frostbite or shock. Sleep came only in brief, painful intervals, broken by screams from nearby rooms, coughing fits, or guards passing through the corridor. As darkness settled, prisoners understood that surviving the day did not mean safety. It only meant their bodies were still considered useful. Each night ended the same way, with uncertainty, pain, and the knowledge that the next morning would begin exactly as this one had, if they lived long enough to see it.